Welcome to Wisdom Trek with Gramps. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, and we are on day 2448 of our trek. The purpose of Wisdom Trek is to create a legacy of wisdom, to seek out discernment and insights, and to boldly grow where few have chosen to grow before. In today's Wisdom Nugget, we'll continue our exploration in Psalm chapter 18, a powerful psalm of David that reflects the gratitude to God for deliverance and victory over his enemies. In the previous episodes, we've seen how David praised God for his strength, faithfulness, and protection. We've reflected on how God's way is perfect, how he arms us with strength, and how he makes our path secure. Now we'll dive into Psalm chapter 18, verses 37 through 45 from the New Living Translation, and we'll witness David's description of his triumph over his enemies, a victory that he attributes entirely to God's enabling power. These verses depict the battle's intensity, the victory's totality, and David's humility in recognizing God's role in his success. So let's set out on our trek for today, delving into the depths of Psalm chapter 18, verses 37 through 45. I chased my enemies and I caught them. I did not stop until they were conquered. I struck them down so they could not get up, and fell beneath my feet. You have armed me with strength for the battle, and you have subdued my enemies under my feet. You have placed my foot on their necks. I have destroyed all who hated me. They called for help, but no one came to their rescue. They even cried to the Lord, but he refused to answer. I ground them as fine as the dust in the wind. I swept them into the gutter like dirt. You gave me victory over my accusers. You've appointed me ruler over nations. People I don't even know now serve me. As soon as they hear of me, they submit. Foreign nations cringe before me. They lose all their courage and come trembling from their strongholds. We begin with verses 37 and 38. I chased my enemies and caught them. I did not stop until they were conquered. I struck them down so they could not get up. They fell beneath my feet. Here David biblically describes the relentless pursuit of his enemies. His words paint a picture of determination and total victory. David did not merely defend himself or avoid confrontation. He actively pursued his enemies until they were completely subdued. This pursuit symbolizes the spiritual battles that we face in our lives. When we confront sin, fear, or any obstacle that stands in our way, we must do so with the same tenacity, not stopping until we have overcome it by God's power. David's description of striking down his enemies so that they could not get up and falling beneath his feet illustrates the totality of his victory. This wasn't a partial or temporary win. It was a decisive and final conquest. In our spiritual walks, this reminds us that God calls us to be more than conquerors. We are not meant to live in a state of ongoing defeat or partial victories. Through Christ, we can achieve complete victory over the challenges we face. Verse 39 is a crucial turning point of the verses. You have armed me with strength for my battle. You have subdued my enemies under my feet. Here David shifts his focus from his own actions to the true source of his strength, which is God. David acknowledges that it was God who armed him with strength needed for the battle. These verses encapsulate the foundational truth. While we may be the ones on the battlefield, it is God who equips us with the necessary strength and resources to achieve victory. David also credits God with subduing his enemies under his feet. This imagery is significant because it shows that the victory was not just David's, but God's. David was the instrument through which God brought the defeat on his enemies. We must remember that our victories are not solely due to our efforts, wisdom, or strength. They result from God's empowerment and his work in and through us. This verse encourages us to rely on God's strength rather than our own. When we face battles, whether they are against external adversaries, internal struggles, or spiritual forces, we must seek God's strength, knowing that he is the one that ultimately secures the victory. In verses 40 through 42, David continues, You placed my foot on their necks. I have destroyed all who hated me. They called for help, but no one came to their rescue. They even cried to the Lord, but he refused to answer. I ground them as fine as dust in the wind. I swept them into the gutters like dirt. These verses describe the finality of David's victory over his enemies. The image of placing his foot on their necks is one of total domination. In ancient times, this was a symbolic act that demonstrated complete control over a defeated foe. David's enemies were utterly subdued, unable to rise or retaliate. This serves as a powerful metaphor for the ultimate triumph of God's people over their adversaries. David also notes that the enemies called for help, but no one came to rescue, not even the Lord. This is a sobering reminder that there comes a point when those who persist in evil and opposition to God may find themselves beyond help. Their cries for deliverance go unanswered because they have chosen to set themselves against God's purposes. This is a warning to all who oppose God's will and a comfort to those who align themselves with Him, knowing that God is just and He will not just leave the wicked unpunished. The imagery of grinding His enemies as fine as dust in the wind and sweeping them into the gutter like dirt emphasizes the completeness of the defeat. David's enemies were reduced to nothing, scattered like dust, and discarded like refuse. This dramatic portrayal underscores the thoroughness of God's judgment against those who oppose Him and His anointed. In verses 43 through 45, David reflects on a broader implication of his victory. You gave me victory over my accusers. You appointed me ruler over nations. People I don't even know now serve me. As soon as they heard of me, they submit. Foreign nations cringe before me. They all lose their courage and come trembling from their strongholds. David's acknowledgement of his victory extends beyond just the defeat of his immediate enemies. David has elevated him to a position of authority and influence, even over the nations that were previously unknown to him. This speaks of the expansive nature of God's blessings. When God grants us victory, it often has far-reaching effects, impacting not just our immediate circumstances, but also extending to areas that we could have never imagined. The submission of foreign nations and their trembling before David signifies the recognition of God's anointed ruler. These nations, once powerful in their own right, now acknowledge David's authority, not because of his personal power, but because they recognize the divine authority backing him. This is a powerful reminder that when we walk in alignment with God's will, even those who were once opposed to us may come to respect and submit to the authority God has placed in us. David's description of the nations losing their courage and coming trembling before their strongholds illustrates the fear and the awe inspired by God's intervention on behalf of His people. This is not a fear rooted in cruelty or oppression, but in the recognition of God's overwhelming power and the futility of resisting His will. As we reflect on Psalm chapter 18, verses 37 through 45, it's essential to recognizing the overarching theme of God's role in our victories. David was a mighty warrior and a skilled leader, but he continually pointed back to God for all of his source of success. Whether it was the strength to pursue his enemies, the ability to subdue them, or the dominion he gained over the nations, David knew that all of this was due to God's provision and power. This passage challenges us to examine our own lives and victories. Do we recognize God as the one who arms us with strength, or gives us the ability to overcome obstacles, and who grants us success? It is easy to take credit for our accomplishments, but true wisdom lies in the acknowledgement that every good thing we achieve ultimately is a gift from God. Furthermore, these verses remind us the importance of perseverance in the battles that we face. David did not stop until his enemies were completely subdued. In the same way, we are called to press on in our spiritual battles, trusting that God will give us the strength to overcome and the victories that He had promised. As we conclude today's reflection on Psalm chapter 18, verses 37 through 45, let's carry with us the lessons of reliance on God's strength, the importance of complete victory in our spiritual battles, and the recognition of God's role in every success we experience. Just as David pursued his enemies with relentless determination, may we also pursue the path that God has set before us with unwavering commitment, knowing that He will guide us to our victory. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Wisdom Trek. I pray that today's exploration of Psalm chapter 18, verses 37 through 45 has inspired and encouraged you to walk with God. Until the next time, keep seeking God's wisdom, trusting God's strength, and continue to walk in the light of His Word. If you found this podcast insightful, please subscribe and leave us a review. Then encourage your friends and family to join us and come along with us tomorrow for another day of Wisdom Trek, creating a legacy. Thank you so much for allowing me to be your guide, your mentor, and most importantly, I am your friend as I serve you through the Wisdom Trek podcast and journal. As we take this trek of life together, let us always live abundantly, love unconditionally, listen intentionally, learn continuously, lend to others generously, lead with integrity, and leave a living legacy each day. I am Guthrie Chamberlain, reminding you to keep moving forward, enjoy your journey, and create a great day every day. See you next time for more daily wisdom.